Hi there, it's Gabrielle Nicolay from Speech Kids, where we teach little kids to talk and help parents understand their little kids. And today I am delighted to be talking to Clair Lerner. Clair, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Gabrielle. I look forward to our spirited conversation.
Exactly. Clair is a child development and parent expert working with families mostly in the Washington, D.C. area or all over?
Yes, I do. Well, I work with families in the area, but I also do have a parent coaching practice, which enables me to see families around the country, around the world. So
yeah, all over. So tell us more about what that work is like and what you do.
So what I do is I'm in the trenches with parents, meaning that they come to me usually because there's some challenge that they're facing, right? There's excessive tantrums, there are power struggles. They come into my office because they're saying their child's a fascist dictator, or as two moms recently told me that they really wanted their daughter to have efficacy and agency, so they gave her a lot of choices, and now she thinks she's an equity partner. So I've got lots of families who come to me because the parents no longer feel in charge, right? They've got feisty, often 3-4-year-olds who are driving the car, and they need some recalibration around how to be loving and empathetic and understand their children, but also be able to set the clear boundaries they need. And then, of course, there's like lots of, mealtime challenges, potty training issues, really the full gamut of typical challenges that arise in early childhood. And so what I'm doing is I'm peeling back the layers with families. It's doing detective work. It's really trying to figure out what are all the pieces of this puzzle that makes up this child, and what do we think is really the root cause of the behavior. So we're never just dealing with behavior for behavior's sake, because that rarely is effective, as you know. Mm-hmm. It's really about understanding what the driving force is behind the clinginess or the refusal to use the potty or the sleep time challenges, so that we can come up with strategies collaboratively to solve that problem effectively and in a developmentally appropriate way.
And so I'm imagining that when parents come to you, it's basically like, my child refuses to use the potty. Give me a potty plan so that my child will use the potty. Give me strategies to use, right? That's how they come in the door, yes?
Right.
Okay, but then you mentioned something that happens before we get to the strategies. We have to do something.
Well, right. So, a one-size-fits-all approach is rarely effective, because the reason a child might be resistant to use the potty, or using it to pee but not to poop, using it at school but not at home. I mean, there's a range of issues that, or holding in their poop and getting constipated. The reason those behaviors are at play could be for many different reasons. I mean, you can line up 10 kids who are over 3 and resistant to using the potty, and it could be for 10 very different reasons, right?
I think we get confused, right? Parents get very confused about, well, they're just being stubborn. Tends to be what I hear a lot too, right? Like, it's like, well, they just don't want to listen. They don't want to. And I usually say to parents, like, okay, so you're 3, you've arrived on this planet 3 years ago. You don't really know how things work. There's absolutely no reason not to want to use the potty, unless it's aversive to you in some way. Mm-hmm. And so if it's aversive, we got to figure it out. And we're dealing with potty, but we've stuck sort of with the potty example, but it's true for bedtime. There's no reason not to want to go to bed, except whatever's internal to your child, and that's valid.
Right. Yeah? So I think, here's how I approach these challenges, whatever it is, whether it's sleep or potty learning or mealtime issues or tantrums, physical aggression, whatever it might be. the way I have come to see it, the way I organize it in my head, and the way I help parents think about it is, first, that all behavior has meaning, right? And our job together is to understand the meaning by putting together the pieces of the puzzle. And the three big pieces are development. So you always want to take a look and think about what is at play developmentally, right? So is there a delay in a skill that is making it hard for them to be effective at whatever the task may be, potty learning, sleep, whatever it might be, accepting rules and limits, and, you know, being able to cope with frustration, like whatever it may be, you want to think about what is the developmental piece, right? So if you have a kid who is as having very frequent, intense tantrums, then you always want to consider, and you know this very well, like, is there a language issue here? Is that a piece of this puzzle? Because it's just like a medical diagnosis. If you miss an important piece of the puzzle, the rule out, you're not going to be effective in solving the problem because you're missing a very important variable. So you want to always look at developmentally, not just the skill piece, but also just what do we know about 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, right? So, you know, we know that 3-year-olds are all about power and control. So you're going to expect that power struggles, you know, being demanding, being controlling are all things that we expect at this age. And you want to have that perspective, right? Is what are the developmental factors here? The next big bucket is temperament, which of course, you know how I feel about temperament and the fact that, like, I wish every OBGYN helped parents understand this important variable so that when they have their baby, they have this lens to understand what makes my child tick, right? Because it's such an important piece of the puzzle. I think of it as the why of behavior, right? So like the what of behavior is, what is a child doing? They're sitting up, they're rolling, they're saying this many words, they can solve this kind of mental problem. Temperament is the why. Like, why is my child clinging to me for dear life when all the other kids are running on the playground having a grand time? Like, why is my child flying off the handle because I gave him his cereal in the blue bowl instead of the red bowl, while my other children is like, whatever, it's the same Cheerios, right? You know, why is my child, you know, react to every single piece of clothing we put on him where other kids are not bothered by any of this? Like, it explains why children behave the way they do. And so that's another big piece of the puzzle. Do you have a slow to warm up kid or a kid who jumps right in? Do you have a kid who's a low activity level or a high activity level? So that's another piece of the puzzle. And then the third is context or environment, meaning what is going on in this child's world that may be having an impact. So of course, COVID, huge, major contextual factor from, but then there's, you know, new siblings, a loss in the family, a family move, a parent being under stress, any kind of separations.
Change of a nanny. Please let's not forget the caregivers.
Change of the caregiver, huge. And so those are the three big variables, but I can't sort of end this description without saying that when it comes to context, the temperament piece is huge, because if you have a highly sensitive kid who is wired to just experience things more deeply, sensory and emotional, then a seemingly small change can actually result in a very big reaction. So oftentimes parents are like, oh, there isn't really anything big that's happened. And then you find out that, like, grandma has come to stay for a few weeks, which they think of as a positive, and it is, but it's also a stressor for some kids when the dynamics in the family change. So kids who are more highly sensitive, like in my practice, during COVID, those kids writ large had a much harder time adapting to this seismic shift in their world, where the kids who Thomas Boyce labeled so helpfully, you know, the dandelions, the kids who sort of just thrive no matter what, they did better. But the orchids are just going to have a harder time often with not just big, but even small changes in their world. So what I'm doing with families is I'm really dissecting what are all the variables at play so we can understand why your child is refusing to use the potty.
Yeah, it's so important because again, that match or mismatch usually between, number one, temperaments in the family, right? Because you've got kids who are of one temperament and parents who are one temperament who may or may not mesh very well. And then you've got circumstances and expectations and sort of the environment that either is a good fit or not. And a lot of what I deal with in my practice is we see late talkers who tend to be those sensitive kids, whether or not they're diagnosed. And I think in that orchid category, it's an interesting, I loved Thomas Boyce's work, and obviously Raising Orchid Kids is based on that, which is this parenting class that we run. But it's within the orchid family, there are kids with diagnoses and there are kids who don't need diagnoses, right?
Right.
And given a shift in the environment, and so much of what we do at in my practice is we change the environment to better suit the child.
Mm-hmm.
And in many cases, that's the linguistic environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting parents to talk less. We're getting parents to not schedule so many activities, to reduce transitions. And I'm sure that some of these are the things that you're recommending
Mm-hmm.
that parents do
Mm-hmm.
as well, right? We get dressed every day sometimes because it just avoids power struggles and meltdowns. And so we're making shifts in the environment to see what happens
Mm-hmm.
on the child's side of things. And can we get those two to match better?
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, Gabrielle, that is the basis and the philosophy behind my practice. So I'm a trained psychotherapist. I started my career back in the late 80s. It's sort of stunning to me to still date myself in that way. But as a child therapist, doing play therapy, I evolved doing lots of different things in the field. Ended up at 0 to 3 for a long time, which exposed me to lots of brain science and lots of, really important, much more teaching than clinical work. And when I got back into the clinical work, I decided that I could be more helpful to families by working directly with parents and caregivers and teachers and helping them understand what makes this child tick, what are all the variables at play, and what could they do to support the child, change the environment, adapt their parenting strategies that often made the biggest positive changes for the kids. And so that is what you just described is very much the focus of my practice. So if I can help a parent understand that the child isn't purposefully being aggressive, right, or it's not misbehavior to demand 20 more books at bedtime, like that's in the DNA of a child. Like what child is going to say, it really is time to stop reading and to say goodnight so my brain and my body can get the recharge it needs? No, like I have not in 33 years met a child who said that.
But I'm the parent and I have a law degree, and at work, they listen to me when I explain why something has to be done a certain way.
Yeah. Well, and therein lies the rub, right? Is that parents in so many other aspects of their lives feel in complete control, right? I ask someone to do this, they do it, or I get a task, I do it, and all is right with the world. Now they have a human being who, again, right, has a different they all have different developmental trajectories, temperamental trajectories, different environmental factors, and they're puzzles. And a lot of actually the most effective best parenting is actually very counterintuitive. Like for example, parents often have a hard time setting limits because it results in a tantrum, which feels very uncomfortable. So parents find themselves reneging on the limit or getting into the whole, what I call the gray zone of constant negotiation. they start to feel like they're losing control. That makes them feel very angry that their child is misbehaving. And once we unpack it, the whole goal is to get the parent back in charge in a positive way. But it starts with them not seeing their child as misbehaving on purpose. And that enables a process for them to get back in control. But it's a very different process than it looks like at work.
Right. Where you just get to wield your authority and people do what you
want. For some.
Yeah. Keeping calm in the face of a little person who is screaming, I think is like, it's the single hardest thing to do. And to your point about a lot of parenting is counterintuitive. It feels like both, I think, emotionally from a emotional solidarity point of view, like, oh, my child is upset, therefore I need to be upset. But also from a, well, just kind of because of mirror neurons, right? When we're just mirroring whatever everything is going on emotionally, it feels like the least possible thing to do is to keep yourself calm. And yet
it's the linchpin. So, I mean, to me, this is the greatest struggle of parenting. I mean, I still struggle with it, and my kids are 28 and 30. Okay. Like, managing our own emotions is really, really hard. And parenting is very triggering. Our kids are so triggering to us because we love them so deeply that when we either see them upset or we see them doing something that we know is not good for them, we get triggered. And often that leads to a response that is not the most helpful, and also can actually exacerbate the problem, right? So while it's a heavy lift, a lot of the work I'm doing with parents is not just giving specific suggestions about how to respond, let's say, to a tantrum or a sleep issue, but it's helping the parent tune into what their thoughts and feelings are, because their mindset is what influences what they do next. So actually, I don't know if I told you, Gabrielle, but I've written this book. It's coming out in September. We can talk about it another time, but it's all about, and it's actually called Why Is My Child in Charge? For a very good reason. Because almost every parent who comes into my office, like, that's really their ultimate question. It's like, what happened here? Like, why is my child, like, why is bedtime 3 hours? Like, that was not our intention. Yep. We don't think it's healthy, but we don't know how to get out of it. And as I started to do this work with parents and do all this unpacking, I started to see a whole range of mindsets that led parents down a path that often made the problem worse, not better. And the reason I mention all this in response to your question is that one of the biggies is that when my child is upset, and tantruming, or that the trigger is that somehow that experience for my child is detrimental, and I have to end it immediately. So we get triggered by their emotion, then we feel very uncomfortable and we just want to make the whole thing go away. So what we do is we get into a protracted power struggle, or we become very authoritarian, which we all know is not a good approach. We become harsh and punitive, or we become permissive when we know that really what the child needs is love and empathy and limits. So instead of saying, that's it, if you don't, stop screaming right now, we're never getting candy again, or you're never watching a screen again, things that most kids know the parent actually has no intention of actually implementing. And being able to say, I know, bud, it's never enough books at bedtime. It's so hard. I would love to read 100 books too, but that's our rule. And it's totally fine if I'm not even asking you to agree with it. Why would you agree with it? But that's a mommy daddy rule. And we're going to say goodnight. And it's okay if you need to be upset about that. We totally get it. But it's our job to make sure that you get to bed on time. And I can't wait to read that next book to you in the morning. I love you. Good night. and know that the protest is not misbehavior. It's not designed to drive you crazy. It's just their way of saying, I don't like this rule or limit. But when you stick with it in a loving way and don't get reactive and don't get into the gray zone of constant negotiation or trying to get your child to agree with it, kids adapt.
Yes.
And so,
this is, oh God. I mean,
yeah, anyhow.
I actually want people to rewind the last minute of when Claire was talking just now, because I was very tuned into my body as you were talking, and I could feel, I felt safe. I felt in control, and I felt like you knew, and I was just doing a little role play for myself, but I felt like, oh gosh, Claire knows what's going on. Like I felt that in my body.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that we do a little bit of too in Raising Orchids, and as well in my therapy practice, is like, how does this feel in your body when you're so mad at your child, or when you just wish they would go the hell to sleep, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's tight. It's not open. It's not calm. It's not expansive. And guess what? If that's the energy you're putting out, then you're going to get it right back at you. When you can stay grounded in what you know is the right decision for your child, and let them have their feelings, because everybody gets to have their own feelings and everybody gets to decide what their behavior is going to be, right? You're not in charge. None of us is in charge of anybody else's behavior, as much as we would love to be.
Well, you know, Gabrielle, so right in there, here's the 3 mind shifts that can change your life, right? One is that your child isn't misbehaving on purpose. You don't need to be angry. You don't have to feel like a bad parent that somehow you're raising a sociopath because they're not following rules or directions, right?
Yep.
They're not misbehaving on purpose. Tantrums are not harmful to children. Feelings are part of, this is something you're helping them acknowledge, accept frustration, sadness, anger. It's not detrimental to kids. In fact, setting loving limits is what develops all this grit and resilience that everybody is gaga for good reason, right? But it starts with learning to be able to manage when you can't have what you want when you want it. And the final one, which is probably the most humbling and important one, is that you have 0 control over your child. Like, they are a human being. They are the only ones that decide what comes out of their mouth, what they do with their bodies. You cannot like make a child not have a tantrum, pee or poop on the potty, you know, not hurl venom when they're angry at you, go to sleep. Like, only they control those things. What you control is how you respond in those moments that make it much more likely that your child is going to behave in a way that is most healthy for them.
Yeah. And I think when we have dandelions, parents of dandelions don't confront this reality of the lack of control until much later, because their dandelions are good at masking, their dandelions are good at complying, their dandelions are good at workarounds, they're good at lying, quite frankly, right? They figure out an easy way, and they're easy, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect them so much. The orchids are the ones who fight back, who protest. And again, for whatever reason, be it a speech and language delay, be it a sensory motor issue, be it a behavioral issue, it doesn't matter that much, right? Temperament. But they are the ones who fight back. They are the ones who trigger us directly. Mm-hmm. And those are I'm sure those are the majority of families who come to your shop have these kids who are a little bit sensitive. And now this is being exacerbated by the fact that we can't control anybody's behavior.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that that largely the majority of families who come to me have a child who is wired to be more sensitive. Now, in other situations, a kid who's more of a dandelion, a more go with the flow, less easily upset child or triggered child, if there's enough contextual factors, like during COVID, for example, there did come a point where many kids who had been more adaptable, had been more, better able to weather life's ups and downs, even they started to have more behavioral issues because they got to that point where their stress level, where they met their threshold. I think for highly sensitive kids, they meet their threshold for stress much earlier and much quicker. It doesn't take that much to stress them because their system is already highly sensitized. So it is true. And I think I have found that that's a very validating perspective to parents of highly sensitive kids, that like your child didn't choose to be wired this way. You didn't make them this way, but taking that into consideration is critically important because they are so triggering. And if you get reactive to already a highly reactive child, as you mentioned before, given mirror neurons and all we know from brain science, you're only escalating and amplifying that. So I'll share with you on this idea of parental self-control, that one strategy I came up with that's not earth-shattering, but I put it into some kind of sort of paradigm to help parents digest it and be able to use it, is that what I say to them is that when you're triggered, because your child's being defiant, they're not agreeing to do something, that if it's not life or death, like your child isn't running into the middle of the street, that it can be very powerful to do something like this. You just state, oh, Charlie, so I've asked you to hand back the tablet. You're having a hard time following that direction. Like you just like sportscast, you just state, you don't have to be a psychologist, you just state what's in front of you, right? I've asked you to stay in your room at lights out. You've come out. I'm going to take a mommy moment to think about how I'm going to help us solve this problem. Okay, now I will tell you, in some percentage of kids, they just comply immediately because they're like so freaked out that you're not screaming and yelling and you're being very regulated. I've had kids literally like hand back the tablet, like fine, just take
okay,
it,
Mom.
right? And then you turn away, and if you're by yourself, you're not with your partner, you do kind of this, you say, so let me see. So Charlie's a human being. I can't make him give me back the tablet, like it's his body. So what are his two great choices? Well, I guess one choice is he gives back the tablet and then he can have his screen time later today, his second show. But if he chooses not to cooperate with the direction, okay, that's his choice, then there just can't be that show later because those aren't the rules around screen use. And you literally say it aloud and they're listening, but you're talking to yourself. And then you turn back to and say, oh, Charlie, so I've thought about our problem and here are your two great choices. And if he runs away and hides, you calmly go and you say, I can be a helper. And you peel it out of his hands as calmly as you can. You put it far away and you move on. Yep. You're not angry. You've just solved the problem. He chose not to cooperate. Okay. No frustration, no anger. He's just testing to see if his strategy is going to work to keep and you move on.
Yeah.
Now, if you have a partner available, it's really powerful. You have the conversation in front of the child. So I may be like, oh, Gabrielle, so we've asked Charlie to give back the iPad. He's having a hard time. What do you think? What are his two great choices? Because he's really in charge of the outcome. Either he gives it back and he gets his time later, or he chooses not to, then we have to be a helper. We have to take it. That might feel uncomfortable, like peeling it out of his hands, but the screen does have to go away. So what will it be? So that's a strategy that I find buys parents time. And it's an amazingly powerful model for self-regulation for the child.
I love that so much. I mean, there's so much in there. There are going to be people watching who are like, their minds are blown. They're not quite sure what to do. And they're going to say, yeah, but. So if parents are having that yeah, but moment, where can they find you? Because they need to call you. They can call me too, but they can call you too. Where are people finding you?
The best thing to do really is to go on my website. Okay. Which is just lernerchilddevelopment.com, because I have all the information about my services. I also have a blog. I write prolifically. I write several blogs every month on these kinds of in the weeds issue. They're all very actionable. Like I'm trying to decode what do we really think is going on and what can you do in the trenches. So the best thing to do is go to the website and also sign up. I have a free newsletter. I send it out, every couple weeks on, again, all the issues the families I'm working with struggle with. And what I do is I show the case, like what parents came to me with, what the mindsets were that got them tripped up, the plan they were able to make and the solution, so that families can really imprint their own situation, like using a similar process of unpacking, figuring out the root cause and solving the problem. So those are really the two best ways to find me.
Fantastic. And we will have you back in the fall. Congratulations on the book coming out.
That would be great. I would love to talk to you about it. Lots of fodder there.
Yes. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun, Gabrielle.